In 1903, Britain did not panic because of an army. It did not panic because of a war. It panicked because of a railway. A single train line still unfinished was enough to alarm the most powerful empire on earth. At the time, Britain controlled nearly a quarter of the world. Its navy ruled the seas. Its trade routes shaped global economics. Its empire survived on one core principle: whoever controls movement controls power. For more than a century, Britain had ensured that global movement flowed through the oceans, and the oceans belonged to the Royal Navy. India, the Middle East, Africa, all connected by sea routes Britain could defend, block, or dominate at will. Then Germany proposed something revolutionary: a railway stretching from Berlin to Baghdad. On paper, it looked like an economic project, a faster way to move goods, a modern infrastructure plan. But British strategists saw something else entirely. This railway would create a continuous land corridor from Europe into the heart of the Ottoman Empire. No ships, no canals, no British control. For the first time, a rival power could reach the Middle East without touching British seas. That terrified London, because the Middle East was not just territory, it was a strategic bridge between Europe and India. And beneath its deserts lay something even more valuable: oil. At the turn of the 20th century, Britain was transitioning from coal-powered ships to oil-powered fleets. That made Middle Eastern access not optional but essential for survival as a naval power. The Berlin-Baghdad Railway threatened to link German industry directly to Ottoman oil fields, markets, and military routes. If completed, Germany could move resources, soldiers, and influence faster than Britain could respond by sea. This was not theory. British intelligence reports warned that the railway could undermine British dominance in the Persian Gulf, weaken British influence inside the Ottoman Empire, reduce the strategic value of the Suez Canal, and expose India's western frontier to land-based pressure to Britain. This train was not transportation. It was a weapon, a silent one. Railways don't conquer cities overnight. They slowly shift power, mile by mile, station by station. That is why Britain did not oppose the railway openly at first. Instead, it moved quietly, applying diplomatic pressure, funding rival railway routes, encouraging political instability inside the Ottoman Empire, and delaying construction through legal and financial obstacles, all to buy time. Because Britain understood a brutal truth of empire. You don't need to defeat an empire in battle. You only need to break its control over movement. And if this train ever reached Baghdad at full capacity, Britain's global dominance would no longer be guaranteed. To understand Britain's fear, you have to understand how the British Empire actually worked. Britain was not a land empire like Russia. It was not a continental power like Germany. Britain was a maritime empire. Its strength did not come from controlling territory directly. It came from controlling routes. Sea routes, trade routes, energy routes. This system gave Britain a huge advantage. Any rival could be blocked. Any colony could be isolated. Any economy could be pressured simply by cutting access to the sea. The Berlin-Baghdad Railway threatened to neutralize that advantage completely. For the first time, a major European power could bypass British naval dominance and move deep into the Middle East by land. No Suez Canal. No Royal Navy checkpoints. No British permission. This changed the strategic equation overnight. If Germany gained reliable land access to the Ottoman Empire, Britain would lose its leverage over Ottoman decision-making, Middle Eastern trade, Persian Gulf security, and ultimately, the protection of India. India was the core of the British Empire. Everything Britain did in the Middle East was designed to protect the route to India. The railway threatened that route indirectly, and that made it dangerous. British military planners feared that in a future conflict, Germany could move troops through Ottoman territory, supply forces without using ships, and pressure Britain's Eastern Empire without naval confrontation. This meant Britain's greatest weapon, its navy, could become irrelevant in a land-based struggle. Even worse, the railway connected directly to regions where oil exploration was accelerating. By the early 1900s, Britain had already realized that oil would decide future wars. Coal-powered empires were becoming obsolete. Oil-powered empires would dominate the 20th century. If Germany secured land access to Middle Eastern oil fields, Britain risked losing fuel security, naval superiority, and long-term global leadership. This is why British opposition to the railway intensified after 1908, not publicly, quietly. Britain began to support rival French and Russian interests inside the Ottoman Empire, pushed financial pressure through international banks, encouraged political fragmentation within Ottoman leadership, and delay railway financing at every possible stage. None of this looked like war, but all of it was preparation. Because Britain knew something crucial: if this railway succeeded, future wars would not be fought on the seas alone. They would be fought on land corridors that Britain could not easily control. And empires built on one system rarely survive when the system changes. The Berlin-Baghdad Railway was not just steel and steam. It was a warning, a signal that the world was shifting from naval empires to industrial land empires. The Berlin-Baghdad Railway did not just threaten Britain, it reshaped the fate of the Ottoman Empire. By the early 1900s, the Ottomans were no longer a dominant power. They were financially weak. politically divided, technologically behind Europe, but their geography was priceless. The Ottoman Empire sat at the crossroads of Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. Whoever influenced Istanbul could influence trade routes, energy, access, and imperial strategy across 3 continents. Germany understood this clearly. Unlike Britain and France, Germany did not yet control vast colonies. It needed influence without occupation, investment without conquest. The railway offered exactly that. Germany presented itself as a partner, not a ruler. German banks financed construction. German engineers planned the route. German technology modernized Ottoman infrastructure. To the Ottoman leadership, this looked like survival. The railway promised economic development, modern transportation, stronger central control over distant provinces, and independence from British and French financial pressure, but accepting German support came with consequences. Britain and France had spent decades keeping the Ottoman Empire economically dependent. Debt was their main tool. Loans came with political strings attached. The railway threatened to break that system. If the Ottomans gained an alternative partner, they could renegotiate debts. They could resist foreign pressure. They could regain autonomy. That possibility alarmed London and Paris. As German influence grew, so did external interference inside Ottoman politics. Rival factions were encouraged. Ethnic tensions were exploited. Financial instability was intensified. The empire became a pressure cooker. Every delay in the railway project created new disputes. Every construction phase triggered diplomatic protests. Every kilometer of track increased foreign surveillance. The Ottoman Empire was no longer building a railway. It was navigating a geopolitical minefield. And the timing made everything worse. At the same moment the railway advanced, Europe itself was becoming unstable. Arms races accelerated. Alliances hardened. Trust collapsed. The Ottoman Empire was forced to choose sides, remain tied to Britain and France, and remain weak, or align with Germany and risk confrontation. By 1914, the choice was effectively made. Germany offered military reform, infrastructure, and strategic partnership. Britain offered control, caution, and delay. For an empire desperate to survive, momentum mattered more than promises. The railway became a symbol. To Germany, it was access and influence. To the Ottomans, it was modernization and independence. To Britain, it was an unacceptable shift in global power. When war finally came, it did not come out of nowhere. The alliances, the rivalries, and the fear had already been laid down, mile by mile, along the railway's path. By the early 1910s, Britain had accepted a hard reality. The Berlin-Baghdad Railway could not be ignored anymore. Diplomatic delays were no longer enough. Financial obstacles were failing. Construction continued slowly, but steadily. Every completed section of track reduced Britain's strategic comfort. At the same time, Europe was moving toward confrontation. Naval arms races intensified. Military budgets expanded. Alliance systems locked into place. In this atmosphere, the railway stopped being a long-term concern. It became an immediate strategic threat. British planners understood that if war broke out, the railway would change everything. Germany would not be forced to challenge British naval supremacy directly. Instead, it could strike through land routes, supplying the Ottoman front, threatening British interests in Mesopotamia, disrupting access to Persian Gulf oil, and pressuring the approaches to India. This is why British war planning began to include one silent objective: the railway must not function at full capacity. Officially, Britain never declared the railway an enemy target. Unofficially, it shaped every move Britain made in the region. British diplomacy pushed the Ottoman Empire toward isolation. British intelligence increased its presence in the Middle East. British financial pressure intensified against German-backed projects. And when war finally erupted in 1914, the railway became a battlefield without being named one. Britain moved quickly to secure Mesopotamia. Not for territory alone, but to block the railway's southern access. The capture of Basra was not accidental, it was strategic. Controlling Basra meant controlling the endpoint that connected the railway to the Persian Gulf. Without that outlet, the railway lost much of its global value. Meanwhile, British forces targeted infrastructure that supported rail transport, bridges, depots, supply hubs. The goal was not destruction for spectacle, it was disruption. Slow the train, delay the movement, break the connection, because Britain understood something fundamental about modern war. You don't need to destroy infrastructure completely, you only need to make it unreliable. The railway never operated as originally planned during the war, not because it failed technically but because geopolitics crushed it. By the end of World War I, the Ottoman Empire collapsed. German influence in the Middle East vanished, and Britain emerged with expanded control over the region. The train that once threatened British dominance never reached its full potential, but its impact was irreversible. It reshaped alliances, it redirected military planning, and it exposed a truth that would define the modern world. Infrastructure is power. The Berlin-Baghdad Railway never fully operated as it was designed. The trains never ran freely from Europe to the Persian Gulf. The grand vision collapsed under war, borders, and imperial ambition. but the damage had already been done, because the railway changed how empires behaved. Before this project, power was measured in fleets and colonies. After it, power was measured in infrastructure and access. Britain stopped the train, but in doing so, it accelerated a transformation it could not control. World War I destroyed the Ottoman Empire. In its place, Britain and France redrew the Middle East through mandates and artificial borders. These borders were not designed for stability. They were designed for control. Railways, ports, pipelines, all were planned to serve imperial interests, not local societies. The Middle East became a region shaped by external logistics rather than internal cohesion. Oil replaced rail as the new strategic obsession. Pipelines followed many of the same routes the railway once promised. Control of energy became the new version of controlling movement. Britain achieved its short-term goal. Germany lost influence. The railway project was neutralized, but the long-term cost was enormous. By fragmenting the Ottoman space, Britain helped create chronic regional instability, artificial states with fragile legitimacy, endless competition over transit routes and resources. The strategy that stopped one train helped destabilize an entire region, and Britain itself did not escape the consequences. The war drained British finances. Debt replaced dominance. The empire emerged victorious, but weakened. The same logic Britain feared from the railway eventually turned against it. New powers built new systems. Air routes replaced sea lanes. Land corridors returned through pipelines, highways, and rail networks. Control slipped away. The lesson of the Berlin-Baghdad Railway is not about trains, it is about fear. When an empire fears losing control over movement, it reacts aggressively, even preemptively. Sometimes, that reaction reshapes the world more than the threat itself. Britain stopped the train, but in doing so, it helped ignite a war, dismantle an empire, and redraw a region whose consequences are still unfolding today. One unfinished railway was enough to expose the fragility of global power, not because of what it carried, but because of what it threatened to change. The rules of empire.